December 12th, 2009, a new reality television show premiered on American screens which pitted the nation's finest athletes against each other in a bid to overcome increasingly impossible obstacles for the chance to win $1 million. And the show was called American Ninja Warrior. Of tens of thousands of athletes who apply each year to appear on the show, 100 contestants are selected and must successfully progress through their respective city finals to make it to Las Vegas for the national finale at Mount Midoriyama. Once in Vegas, there are then four stages that each contestant must face. Stage one has eight obstacles, which test the competitor's agility and pace. Stage two has six obstacles that test competitors' strength and speed. Stage three consists of eight obstacles that test competitors' upper body stamina and grip. And stage four contains the final obstacle of the national finale, a rope climb. And to be crowned an American Ninja Warrior, one must complete the climb in 30 seconds or less. And to make the final test, the last trial, successively more strenuous, the rope length has been increased over the seasons from 50 to 75 feet high. And Lahavdil, over the course of the last 2 weeks, our first founding father has been tested and tried in such a wide array of ways. But our commentators are torn as to which of his 10 increasingly taxing tests was his last and most onerous trial. Everyone agrees that over the past 2 weeks, he has had to leave his home, disown his first son, sever his flesh, save his nephew, threaten his second son, and bury his wife. But some of these episodes are seen as simply part of life, while others are understood as designed by heaven to try Abraham, to refine and purify him, to test and assess his strength and stamina and integrity and fidelity, in short, to reveal whether he was worthy. And this is our question: which moment represents our first founding father's final test? Which of the various assessments represents the zenith of pressure intended to measure his character and mark him as the father of a trailblazing nation? And there are essentially two views in Jewish tradition. First is the view of almost everyone, from multiple Midrashim and Rashi to the Meiri and Maimonides. Our first founding father's final test set at the end of last week's parasha, the Akedah. And perhaps it goes without saying that the prospect of having to kill your own kin, to sacrifice your own son, must be one of the hardest trials to endure. We can only imagine Avram's state, the mix of preemptive grief and psychic upheaval, the sense of bewilderment and complicity in absolute evil, the expectation of incomparable pain induced by one's own hand has to be among the most unassailable and unspeakable and insufferable hurdles in the course of any human life. In fact, writing about the Jewish response to the horrors of the Crusades, the Romanian born historian Shalom Spiegel wrote a book called The Last Trial, surveying the ways in which persecuted Jews survived by envisioning themselves in liturgy and elegies as versions of Avraham having to sacrifice his beloved son. But there is a second view in Jewish tradition, first found in the writings of the anonymous author of the ancient work called Leptogenesis, and then later in the commentaries of the Rashbats and Rabbeinu Yonah, who all contend that Avram's final test was not at the end of last week's parasha, but at the start of ours. For them, the last trial was not the binding of Isaac, but the burial of Sarah. Sarah's death was not simply an unintended consequence of the Akedah for these exegetes, but the deliberately devised, excruciating finale to the set of 10 increasingly strenuous tests. And though it might seem impossible to imagine how the loss of a spouse in the regular course of life might somehow be harder than being told to bind and sacrifice one's child, a number of commentators go to great lengths to show the extent of this test and the strength required on Abraham's part to suppress his distress. Though last week Avram had to face the prospect of the unthinkable, this week it came to pass. Though last week he was forced to imagine his son's demise, this week he did, in fact, lose his wife. Though last week he had to contemplate impending trauma for 3 long days, this week his pain was unanticipated and his grief was unforeseen. Last week his ordeal was in potentia. This week it was real. And the greatest evidence that the death of Sarah was Abraham's final test is what follows. The prize. Right after acquiring the land and laying his wife to rest, the text tells us that heaven blessed him. Avraham Zakein Baba Yamim, Avram was old, advanced in days. For Hashem Berachet Avraham Bakol, and God blessed him with everything. And though there is an extensive debate as to what exactly God gave him, the commentators all seem to agree that this blessing, this award, gave our founding father a hard earned reprieve. But this is where perhaps we might advance a new notion and suggest that Avram's final test was not the binding of his son, nor the burial of his wife, but this blessing itself. Perhaps Avram's 10 tests were less like the American Ninja Warrior and more like The Apprentice, where the prize does not mark the end of the test, but the beginning of another, where the trials are not designed to prove who the contestants are, but to prepare them for what they can be. It is true that the two aforementioned views propose a last trial defined by unfathomable pain. We can barely conceive of the mental lesions, emotional abrasions, psychological sores wrought by the twin traumas of Isaac's binding and Sarah's burial. But perhaps these 10 tests were not ultimately about how much Avram's faith could withstand the pressures of pain, but how far his devotion will lead him to overcome temptation. And as a different Abraham, President Lincoln, once put it, nearly all people can withstand adversity. But if you want to test their character, give them power. And after nearly 3 centuries of persecutions at the hand of Europe's imperial and papal powers, for the first time in 1782, Jews were offered their emancipation. Slowly, discriminatory taxes were abolished, prejudicial labor laws were eliminated, civic protections were extended, and invitations to wider society were granted. And in the face of this unprecedented cultural sea change, the Jews of Europe were understandably suspicious, skeptical, and apprehensive. And beyond the matter of trusting this new face on their neighbors, many wondered whether embracing emancipation meant betraying our ancestors' belief that our segregation from others, though painful and imposed, was actually sacred. And this was the response of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch when he said, I bless emancipation. I rejoice, he said, when I see that regard for the inborn rights of men to live as equals is freely acknowledged. He went on, I see it as the dawn of reviving the humanity of humankind and as a step toward the recognition of all human beings as the children of heaven. So Rav Hirsch saw the promise to end lawful Jewish discrimination as a gift and the opportunity to integrate into society as a chance to live with dignity. But he added another essential sentiment. He said, but I should grieve if Israel understood itself so little that it would welcome emancipation as the end of exile and the highest goal of its historic mission. Our emancipation for Rav Hirsch was not a prize for surviving the horrors of centuries of pain. He went on to say, I only bless emancipation if Israel does not regard it as the goal of its task, but only as the new condition of its mission and as a new trial, much harder than the tests of oppression. Civic freedom, political power, economic assets are not in this reading to be seen as prizes or trophies, but prospects and opportunities, not rewards for past deeds, but occasions for fulfilling our responsibilities to the future. And perhaps it was precisely with this value that heaven tested our founding father at the end of his evaluation to bless him with everything and see what he does. And what he does is not quietly retire or unwind after a life of labor. He turns his attention to the future, seeks a wife for his son, and sets the stage for the rise of the indispensable nation. And this week comes Thanksgiving. And though it is not a tradition that I grew up with, it is one that I've come to adopt with great zeal. My sense of admiration for what this nation stands for cannot be overstated. As the scholar Paul Mendes Floors recently written, the Jews of the United States were never legally emancipated. And the reason for that is that they never needed to be. In the United States, uniquely, Jews never had to fight for legal recognition as citizens. As Mendel Floor puts it, here we enjoyed liberty by right rather than by sufferance. From the beginning, we were assured equality before the law and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So now it falls to us, like it did to our founding father, not to see these blessings as divine prizes for surmounting the obstacles of our history, or to see these rights as a reward for surviving the tests of oppression. The liberties which we hold so dear do not mark the end of our testing, but the beginning. Let us all not only live our lives, relish our liberty, and pursue happiness, but let us use our freedoms to further our mission and redeem the world. I wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and a Shavuot Tov.